Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoy this series, make sure you subscribe to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and like us on Facebook to watch our latest interviews. And of course, visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our humanitarian and advocacy efforts across the globe. Today's conversation continues our recent focus on Holocaust remembrance, delving into a fictionalized version of one liberator's very real experience in Europe right after World War II and his time in pre-state Israel during its fight for independence. Author Manning Rubin's new book, Voyage to the Wall, is a historical novel based on true events, putting the reader in his shoes as Sergeant Joey Goldman, a stand-in for Rubin himself. Stationed in Germany after the victory in Europe, Sergeant Goldman, like the author, is forced to confront the horrors of the Holocaust. This young, naive Jewish U.S. Army soldier from the South must all of a sudden come to terms with a new understanding of his place in the world and the Jewish community. Goldman also uses his Army position to assist the underground Jewish brigade in collecting military supplies for pre-state Israel and to help desperate Jewish refugees get there. Manning Rubin is a World War II veteran who served in the U.S. Third Army. He's a former senior creative director for a number of major ad agencies, and since retiring, has written full-time. His previous books include Keep Your Brain Alive, which he co-authored with the late Dr. Lawrence Katz, and 60 Ways to Relieve Stress in 60 Seconds. Voyage to the Wall is his first novel. He also served as volunteer creative director for the Anti-Defamation League for more than 30 years, where he created and consulted on scores of public service ads to fight prejudice and hatred. And in the interest of full disclosure, that's where I met Manning Rubin more than 35 years ago when I worked for the ADL. Manning, it's good to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Dan. It's so nice to see you in the flesh, so to speak, after all these years.
Well, the first question has to be for an author. What inspired you to write Voyage to the Wall? When did you decide to write the book? And did you find it difficult to put together? Because you've got a lot of historical strands here that required a lot of research.
Well, I've been wanting to write something about this ever since I went there, because it totally changed my view of Judaism and Israel and everything. I was a Reformed Jewish in Charleston, South Carolina. You know, at that time, you weren't bar mitzvahed, you were confirmed at age 15. And seeing what happened in Germany to 6 million Jews, and seeing the plight of the Jewish refugees, of what was left, it changed my whole concept of who I was, and made me a vowed supporter of Israel ever since. It's why I volunteered to work for the ADL to fight prejudice, and I did a lot of supporting Israel ads at that time. So I finally decided I wanted to write this partially memoir book, and I started in 2013. And started doing a lot of research at the Center for Jewish History in Manhattan. It's where I got so many striking information, a lot of letters from survivors, a lot of letters and statements from those who fought in the struggle for Israel. And I read the book about the brigade, which told me all about the brigade, which I had never heard about before. Because actually, surprising as it may seem, I was the staff sergeant in charge of supply for the Nuremberg Ordnance Depot, which was the collecting point and repair point for all of the military vehicles and ammunition. Everything connected with fighting was under my control. Somehow, strangely, I was never contacted by the brigade. all of that information was what I would have done had they contacted me. And I had read about everything they did. And I did an enormous amount of research. So the part that they were all gone. I could say anything I want, but I did. But the truth is what counts. I did run the Nuremberg Ordnance Department supply. I did go to the war crimes trials. Skip Say was a friend. I did go to the first Seder in Wiesbaden. I did take care of getting the two refugees, one to Israel and one to America, to Wilkes-Barre. I did all of that, but I did not do, because I was never connected with the brigade. So I wanted to tell the story of what they did and about the plight of the refugees after the war. I mean, the things that they told me and that I read about just horrified me. The stories that Carl and Joseph told me were all true, and I verified all of that. And the names of the people from the brigade and the incidents that they were involved in, all of that is true based on my research, which I actually went to Israel. I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law who went on Aliyah to Israel in 1968. Bob Goldman, and not related to Joey Goldman, who was a dear friend of mine. Bob was editor for ABC television for 35 years. His son, Paul, is producer and editor for NBC now. His wife, Judy, is a very famous guide. And she arranged for me to go to the Brigade Museum in Naftanya. And I also to meet Mordecai Guichot, who was a member of the brigade. And I interviewed him, and he told me a lot of stories. So over the next 10 years, I was writing the book and doing research.
How would you describe Voyage to the Wall? It's a historical novel. It's also part autobiography. How do you mix? You know, I'm always curious when authors do this, semi-autobiographical novels. What is the challenge there of putting your own experience into the words and actions of the characters who are fictional? How does that work?
Well, the characters are not fiction; they're real, and a lot of the things they said and I wrote about, they actually said. A lot of it they didn't. I made up. You know, knowing who they were and what they did. But I did it through the eyes of a 17-year-old, because that's how old I was at that time. So I tried to use a vernacular that I wouldn't have had at that time. And it's tough at my age to remember all those things. But I had made a lot of notes to myself over the years. And I really wanted to show sort of the inside story, which isn't very publicized, of the plight of these refugees and what they went through as prisoners, as well as what they went through in the terrible aftermath in which the army tried to send them back to their original places where they were killed. And so they were desperate to get out. And of course, Israel was really it was Palestine, was really the only place that wanted them.
We're going to talk about Nuremberg. You were stationed there, and you just mentioned that you went to the trial. That must have been in addition to the other things that you write about, really a transformational experience. To see these leading Nazis in the dock. Tell us about that.
Well, my friend Skip Say was in the press corps there in Nuremberg also. So he would take me to the trials. I was there when they put that, and I wrote about that, when they put the Russians put the footage up and the projector upside down. And so it started off upside down, and everybody just sort of laughed, including those Nazi criminals. When they put it right side up, nobody laughed anymore because it was just horrific piles of dead Jews and parts of dead Jews and piles of children's shoes. And it just, it just shocked me. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that had actually happened, because in Charleston as a kid, the newspapers didn't write a lot about that. It was sort of incidental there, as it was, I'm sure, in lots of parts of the South. So I was just totally changed from that experience.
Now, that part of the book, it details the incident that launches Sergeant Joey Goldman's, the protagonist, his journey of self-discovery and the realization of his Jewish identity. And that's kind of the tip-off for all that follows, would you say?
Yeah, that's really what started it. Going to, I did the things going to Garmisch and going to Dachau. That too was just unbelievable. I mean, the ashes were still in the ovens, and the fellow who had the pictures and showed us the pictures, I used his words to describe things because he was actually there, and that he was a true person, and just seeing the pictures of the cars and the bodies, and it just, you can imagine to a 17-year-old who knew he was Jewish but never knew what really had happened, to the horror that had happened to the Jewish population. And as a World War II veteran, I never expected to see that happening again. I mean, it's just like Hitler's prefaces that is happening in this country with all the anti-Semitism right out of Goebbels' playbook. And it's just got me really upset again.
Voyage to the Wall touches on many important aspects of Jewish history in the years between the end of World War II and 1948, when Israel fought for and gained its independence from the British. But would you agree that the book focuses mainly on the development of Joey Goldman's Jewish identity and his motivation to action?
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about Sergeant Goldman, and what encouraged you to tell the story of his transformation, the metamorphosis from the innocent teenager, and you've just talked about it, coming from Charleston, to the ardent Zionist who sacrifices and lives his life for the Jewish people.
Well, it happened to me. So it was my story, really. It transformed me. I mean, that's why I met you, because I wanted to do things to fight prejudice and to support Israel. The experience, which was mine, I wanted to tell the world. I have an unbelievable review from the Jerusalem magazine. I wrote to the editor and said, "Would you review my book?" And I sent a bunch of books to my brother and sister-in-law who now live in Tel Aviv. And they sent one to him, and he got this young writer to review it. And he says at the end, which I hope would happen, that everybody, Jews and non-Jews, especially young Jews, should read this book and know what actually happened. And I hope that's what happens. I'm trying to promote the book. Promoting the book is harder than writing it. Writing it was easy.
I'm going to take that advice that it was easy, because I haven't done mine yet. Yeah. So I think there's the book. Manning, let me ask you a question. We'll go back to Sergeant Goldman. How does he feel about retribution, and does it continue to be his primary motivation? Your retribution, from what I gather and what I've learned and knowing you, was to jump in, as you said, to jump into the fight against hatred and prejudice, and to work for a strong and viable state of Israel. So, where does Joey Goldman? Where does he fit in terms of his worldview when it comes to retribution? Because I think it's important for those watching or reading to get inside his psyche as to how you can pay back, if you will, by doing X, Y, and Z in response to these terrible crimes. What do you say?
Well, I encourage young people to read about the Holocaust and the struggle to establish Israel and learn the truth. The PLO actually hired a New York advertising agency PR department, and I won't name them, and to publicize the poor things that happened to the Palestinians. And they changed David, Israel, into Goliath and made themselves. And they understand PR. They still do understand PR. The lack of constant knowledge about the Holocaust and about the fight that the Israelis, who were the Palestinians at that time, had to combat against the Arabs and the British, who didn't want the Jews to take over. They didn't want the Jews to take over Palestine because they wanted the Arabs to take it over, and they wanted to control the area and the oil and the communications and everything else about the Mideast. So they were afraid of the Jews coming in and did everything possible to avoid it. The brigade itself was made by volunteers of Jews in Palestine and was part of the British Army, but they kept them away from Germany. They kept them away from fighting. They didn't want them to learn how to use arms until finally Winston Churchill said, "You've got to let them, to the British Army, you've got to let them fight." So they were able to go into Italy, and they fought the Germans who were up on a high hill in Senio, and they beat the hell out of them and got a chance to actually fight. And of course, became the IDF ultimately.
Was it difficult for you writing, years later, decades later, in the voice of a person, and it was you, in the voice of a person who was 17 at the time? In other words, how does an adult, an older person, manage to recapture that 17-year-old voice, even though it was yours, and it's, of course, in the course of memory? But this was the case also of one who questions beliefs, acquires convictions for the first time. Was that easy to do?
I've done a lot of acting in my career. I was a great little actor. And so being able to become yourself at age 15 again was not that difficult. I actually started at 15 and at 17. And I was able to get that voice back. And that's the style of writing I did. Not the mellifluous, long sentences. And I use short pastas because Jim Patterson, for whom I once worked when he was in the advertising business, he always said, "You write a novel, keep the chapters short and keep it going." So that's what I did. But somehow I was able to get back to who I was because it was, burned into my memory. It just burned into it.
In a pivotal moment in the book, Joey, or Joseph, from Charleston encounters Joseph, a Holocaust survivor who has experienced unspeakable things. Was there a reason that you gave them the same name? Is this kind of a moment of self-reflection for Sergeant Goldman?
No, it was actually, that was his name. It wasn't necessarily his last name because I couldn't capture that. But I helped Joseph and Carl. I finally got Joseph through the American Jewish Committee. Got him in touch with them, got his papers done, and got him sent back to Wilkes-Barre. I was just able to recapture those things because imagine walking in and seeing these two pitiful characters, who were just so afraid and withdrawn, and to show him when I showed him my Morgan Albert, he went wild. He couldn't believe it. And the incident that happened in Garmisch, where the girl said, "But when I said I could drink your beer, you want to bet?" And she said, "You want to bet? Do you think I'm a Jew?" That actually happened. Not there, but when I visited Al Moskowitz, who was in Bamberg, and I visited him and his friend Frank Sturdivant, which is in the novel at Garmisch. It happened to him. He said that, and he didn't throw a beer in her face. He slapped her and physically threw her out of the room. So that too, just amazed me. And going on the road to the Seder at Wiesbaden, I was actually stopped by this Irish captain and fined for speeding on a lonely road. And I actually got him back, as I wrote in the book, by refusing when his guys came in for something, and I made them go to Berlin instead. So those things, I remember vividly.
As Sergeant Goldman comes to understand his existence and his life's purpose, he also finds another love in Leah. Who was Leah, and how did she impact his life and identity?
Leah was an actual survivor, Polish survivor, who went through exactly the things that she describes in the book. And that was all in research at the Center for Jewish History on 16th Street, all about her. So I just took all her things and made her a character who Joey fell in love with. I never met this person except in her own words and descriptions in the papers that they sent her, that I researched.
Just talk about the Jewish Brigade for a minute, Manning. Another really interesting aspect of the novel is how you describe members of the Jewish Brigade, how they're capable of anything from forging documents to donning a variety of uniforms to successfully fooling all ranks of the military, from the lowest sentries to the highest officers. Did you know these guys?
I read, isn't that terrible? My memory is such that I'm beginning to lose it. I'm looking in the book now, the book about the brigade.
Did you research this, or did you actually encounter these guys? Because they were clearly doing a lot of courageous and very important work.
In the book about the brigade, I'm trying to find the name of the author, who I should know, because that's what told me all about the brigade, and yet I can't find it in my references.
Do you think that they've received? But do you think, generally speaking, that they've received their due, their historical due? That the people have of course, memories are fading from that period, but that the story perhaps has not been told as well as it should. I mean, you do it in the book for many more people to understand exactly what the Jewish Brigade was and what they were engaged in.
They are all from these books that I read. I must have read. They're all listed in the novel about the brigade. 2 books on the brigade, dozens of books about what happened in the fight, in the struggle to establish Israel, the battles, the cover of the book. The cover of the book, that is actually the place that is Castel that overlooks Jerusalem, where the fight that I wrote about took place actually as I wrote about it. Of course, I made up the part where Joey gets shot by the young Arab boy and throws the rifle with the bayonet on it into the chest of the boy. I made that up, and I made up their relationship and what happened to them. But what happened on Castel and what happened on the battle that I wrote about, where the convoy going down the Jerusalem road was sabotaged with a huge boulder to stop their lead vehicle and line up all the trucks with soldiers and supplies, and the Arabs wiped out many of them. That was all true. All of those things are true, and they're all in these various books on Israel and the struggle to establish it and post-war Israel. And, I've been over there, I think, 5 times, starting in 1968, or 69, rather. When we were married, we went there. And the ADL sent me there once.
Let me ask you, Manning, just a couple more questions. Thinking about your own experiences and what you've written in Voyage to the Wall, are there things that you included in the novel that you wish you had done differently in real life?
I wish that the brigade had found me. I would have done exactly what I wrote about in the book. Everything, including participating in the assassinations of hidden Nazis and getting the supplies done. Because Colonel Larned said, I'm too busy with too many jobs. You run supply and don't tell me about it. Just do it. So I could have done all of those things. I could have given them trucks. I could have given them ammunition. I could have given them weapons. And I wish all that had happened.
One last question, and it's very much an author question, which is, what's the one thing that you hope people will take away from reading the book, and what's the one thing that you hope people understand about the Holocaust that they may not truly comprehend?
Well, there's so many books on the Holocaust. I didn't want to make this a Holocaust book. I wanted to make this the result of the Holocaust book. I wanted I want people to see what happened to the poor refugees afterwards. I want to see how desperate they were. I want to see how the struggle, terrible struggle was to get Israel, and how the Arabs were so awful and still are not so swift. I wanted them to see how the Palestinians could have been helped. Initially, the Israelis wanted to build cities for the Palestinians, but the organization in charge of them, UNRWA, refused to let them build buildings. So they were living in these swampy tents and collapsible buildings. And that's how the PLO was born. I want people to see that and to understand that the Israelis wanted to help the Palestinians and were not allowed. And that I want people to see the real truth of what was going on then, and not what has been falsely written since then. That's my belief.
Well, you really cover a very important period of history, of Jewish history, of world history, and a book which is, as you've just said, really very relevant to the current discussion about these issues. So the book is Voyage to the Wall by Manning Rubin, and it's available via bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you purchase books. Amazon, forgot Amazon.
Yeah.
Wherever you purchase books.
A lot of other books.
Manning Rubin, thank you so much for sharing your important and inspiring story and observations with us, both from your book and from your time in Germany and in pre-state Israel. Wishing you continued success. Good to see you again. There's the book.
Dan, thank you so much for having me, and so nice to talk to you.
Thank you again to author Manning Rubin and to you for watching this conversation with B'nai B'rith. If you enjoyed this interview, subscribe to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our important work. For my guest, Manning Rubin, I'm Dan Mariaschin. Join us again soon.